Welcome, everybody. I was waiting for the numbers of people joining the meeting to settle down a little bit, but it seems like people are still flowing in. So I will very slowly begin our webinar. Thanks all of you for joining us today. My name is Joanna Smith. I am the co-chair of the expert group on reference services and outreach with the ICA. I co-chair with Nampombe Sorombe, who you'll see at the end of the webinar. So we would like to, along with the whole expert group, welcome you for being here today. In my day job, I'm the Director General of Outreach and Engagement at Library and Archives Canada. So I live here on traditional Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in what we now call Ottawa, and it's a beautiful 9 a.m. here. The sun is shining and it's summertime, so I know that's not the same situation for everybody joining us today. So thank you from wherever you are, whatever the weather is and the time of day. Thanks for being here with us today. The expert group on reference service and outreach is one of quite a few expert groups at the ICA. We focus on issues around making archives discoverable, creating opportunities for interaction with collections. We look to provide expert advice to the ICA, to share best practice, create standards where it seems appropriate, and to investigate innovative initiatives. So we thought that today we would create an opportunity for colleagues around the world to share some innovations that have, I would say, sprung up through thinking digitally, through maybe, I don't know, a pandemic that might have happened over the last few years, causing us to think differently. So I think you're going to be thrilled to hear from these three, coming from different angles of work, from creating opportunities to connect with communities virtually, creating opportunities to welcome researchers into a virtual reading room, and then creating really a virtual archives digitally online and a sort of beautiful virtual space. So we've got these three angles to present to you today. I will introduce each presenter as we go. In case you haven't read their bios, I'll give you a few highlights. And I think with that, we're ready to get started. So I'll introduce our first panelist, who is Kelly Osborn from the National Archives and Records Administration in the US. She's worked developing community both internally at NARA, but also externally with users. And this beautiful project, the History Hub, is what she's going to talk to us about today. It's won numerous awards, and I think you will see why quite shortly. So with that, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin your presentation, and we'll save time for questions at the end. Sorry, before you start, Kelly, just to let everybody know, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So I think what our plan is to have each presenter present, and then we have a good chunk of time for questions and answers with the panel as a whole to conclude the seminar. So I'll ask you to hold your questions then, and we'll manage that period after everybody speaks. So with that, over to you, Kelly.
Thank you. Is my presentation up? Did anyone see it? Okay, good.
Yeah, looks good.
Thank you. All right, hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be talking to you today about History Hub at history.gov. History Hub is a support community that was a response to the way users seek information and assistance online. Oops. All right, more specifically, History Hub is a platform where people can get answers from multiple sources, as well as a community of citizen experts that we take care of and nurture and guide through dedicated community management. And at its core, it's a public knowledge base that scales and improves in quality over time. It's also the result of years of ongoing research into how organizations communicate with and serve their audiences. History Hub is based on trends and consumer research and powered by a similar platform to the Apple support community. In fact, our elevator pitch is that we're like the Apple support community for researchers. Most of the larger tech companies have similar support communities, and there are also sites like Reddit and Quora, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. And these sites are prioritized by search engines. They've also really set user expectations about online research. People want to be able to ask a specific question, get help immediately, often from citizen experts. So like if you Google, how do I back up my phone? You're not necessarily going to want to read the Apple manual, but you will want to read someone else saying, how do I back up my phone? And getting help often from citizen experts, as opposed to the Apple staff. People want to be able to ask follow-up questions, and they want to be able to search and find an answer easily. We kind of feel like if we have had someone have to ask us a question directly, then the information is not readily available. So what are our goals? We want to improve customer service for an audience accustomed to immediacy, create a knowledge base that continually improves, decrease our own workload over time by increasing transparency, enable contributions from other institutions like the Library of Congress, from universities, from other archives and libraries, from the public, and from subject matter experts of all types. You can have, we have people who are professors at universities, or gallery directors, or people who have been genealogists for decades. And most importantly, we want to feed the search engines, feed the Googles. Here's an example of History Hub in action. If you search Lost Honorable Discharge Certificate, History Hub comes up as a Google featured snippet, which is a highlighted excerpt of text that Google thinks will quickly answer your question. Google says they're especially helpful for those on mobile and searching by voice. And for us at History Hub, about 65% of our audience is mobile, and we see this as just continuing to grow. I mean, if you think about your own behavior, if you're searching for something, more than likely you're on your phone searching for information. People use their desktops really for work, and that's about it these days. Another example, History Hub comes up as an actual top result from people can search, how do I get my DD 256? This is a really common question. So because we get this question so frequently, it shows up in a couple different places, both an actual top result and as a snippet. So the reason that that happens is because History Hub has search engine optimization advantages. It's fresh content, it updates frequently, and search engines favor new and updated content over static pages. That's why Reddit is so high in search results, as well as Quora. And also plain language. People will use their own words when they ask a question, and those are the same words that that other people are using in the Google search bars, or in the search engine search bars, I should say. So here you can see, if you search, how do I find out if my grandfather was one of the Tuskegee Airmen? It comes up as a top result because that is exactly the phrasing that a user used on History Hub. So what problems are we trying to solve? NARA staff answers a lot of questions on a one-to-one basis through email, phone, in-person consultation. And when these questions are asked in these ways, the information is really helpful to the user, to the individual, but the conversation is locked between the two of them, between the asker and the expert. And over 27,000 research inquiries were submitted through NARA's website in fiscal year 2021. This is when we baselined, this was a baseline metric that we took before adding an enhancement to our Contact Us page on archives.gov that would incorporate History Hub search results into the responses when people started to ask a question. So in the form, they type like, how do I find my, like this form, and a response will pop up before that continues to a form that allows them to contact us directly. So obviously we're answering similar questions again and again, and the responses are obviously the same again and again. Sometimes the answer is out there, but the researchers can't find what they're looking for due to wording mistakes or misunderstandings or even typos. So here's an example where a person was asking about Navy deck logs. They used the term naval records instead of deck logs because that's what I would also use. I wouldn't think to use deck logs. If you search deck logs, you have more results. And we have an archivist from the National Archives who responded and connected those two terms in the Googles. So naval records and deck logs are, if someone searches either, then they can come to this page. Here you have someone asking a question with a typo in the name. They're asking about Marcy Gravy instead of Marcus Garvey, who was a political activist in the early 20th century. So this is another example of a request that probably can't be, they could have found a wealth of information, but they were unclear on the name spelling. So our archivist was able to, again, connect that misspelling, that very specific misspelling with the correct information. And additionally, this information is not just at the National Archives, it's all over the place. So the archivist was able to point the user to various university archives and the Library of Congress as well. So a lot of people don't know who has their information. The distinctions between the Library of Congress and the National Archives in the United States are somewhat esoteric, and why should the user have to know? Here we have an example of a question about someone asking about the Lavender Scare, which was a moral panic about gay people in the United States government, which led to mass dismissals in government service during the mid-20th century. So you can see that this person had input from the National Archives, one of our colleagues from the Library of Congress chimed in, and then a community member also added some information. I think several community members added information as well. Here's another example of a researcher sharing what they know with another researcher. In some cases, users may be asking questions that just can't be answered. They can be asking something that is too broad, or they're confused by like just a myriad of things. So citizen experts can be really helpful here. They can help the person phrase the question better before we have a chance to answer it. So we have a fuller understanding of how to help them. And in some cases, they will just give them the information, the exact information that we would have given them as well. And in some cases, better information that we can provide. So this really frees up the National Archives staff to focus on more complex inquiries that we can answer. And people love it. We routinely get comments like these, which can be really gratifying, not just for us, but for the archivists working on History Hub. We've had people able to find family members, people who say that they had been searching for information for years and they were searching down the wrong path, and we were able to kind of guide them toward better research. So these are super gratifying. So now we're going to talk about some metrics and show our growth since we launched in 2016. New questions and new users for the fiscal year 2023 have already surpassed 2022, and we still have 2.5 months to go in this fiscal year. This is pretty common. We expect to see this to continue to grow, but we're wondering when it's going to level off. Additionally, our other target audience, the search engines, is performing, our other target audience is performing really well. When we launched in 2016, I think it was like right at the beginning of the year, and our views in this year are already close to 2 million, along with about 1 million visitors and a bit more sessions. We've added a conservative projection here, but it could end up being higher than last year when we had the release of the 1950 census and just special blog posts and communities dedicated to this and a ton of questions. April was very stressful for our archivists. We've also seen a 34% reduction in questions that come through the archives.gov contact us page, which, as a reminder, we're at about 27,000 inquiries in FY21. As you can see, as people are able to find their answer, fewer of them are continuing to ask us the question. So lastly, History Hub allowed us to continue to serve the public while our physical locations were shut down during the pandemic, especially the height of the pandemic. History Hub was not created in a response to the pandemic, but we were well positioned to serve when it started. One of our main goals was to remove the barriers of physical location for users so that instead of having to walk into a physical location or call us, we could help them just wherever they are. And it also really helps our experts, and not just our experts, but experts anywhere, serve the public anywhere, anytime. We have one user who is a director of a program at the University of Texas, who's very knowledgeable about military history, who will help answer questions. And the amount of knowledge she knows is staggering. And it will be, when she retires, I'm sure her institution will be devastated. So that's it. We're always looking for ways to work with other institutions. So if you'd like to talk more about how we might work together, please email us at historyhub@nara.gov. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm applauding on behalf of everybody who's listening.
Well, thank you.
Online. That was awesome. There's a question already in the chat, but I think we'll just wait until the end to have you answer that and talk about it together. So we will, thanks so much again. We'll move on to Lisa O'Sullivan's talk. She's going to speak about the virtual reading room at the University of Melbourne. She's currently working with the University of Melbourne's Archives and Special Collections as Program Manager, Engagement and Outreach, which is very similar to the work I do. So Lisa, I know we're trans-Pacific twins in our work, but she's worked in many locations around the world, focusing on this kind of work with audience engagement and outreach through all kinds of media, exhibition development, digital resources, and collection development. So she's got a lot to bring to the webinar today, and we're really excited to hear about this specific project. So over to you, Lisa. Your presentation is viewed on the screen now, so you're good to go.
Fabulous. Thank you, Joanna. And good evening, good day, good morning to everybody. I am coming from unceded territory of the Wurundjeri Nation of the Kulin Nations in Naarm or Melbourne, Australia, and I acknowledge their elders past and present. So the University of Melbourne is my home location, and we created a virtual reading room service during some fairly long lockdowns. I should also like to acknowledge the fact that while I'm presenting this evening, today, this service has become integrated into our reading room services run by Sam Smith and a team of client service officers there. And I'm not sure why my screen has decided not to let, page 2. So what is a virtual reading room? At its very basis, it's a Zoom. It's a slightly more complicated Zoom session, is what I tell people. It's real-time, human-mediated digital access to the kind of archival, rare, or special materials that you would normally have to go to a university or other institutional reading room to see. So non-circulating collections. We use high-resolution visualizers and video conferencing to live stream footage. So it's a one-on-one research consultation, which is available when travel is not possible for someone to come into our reading room, or for whatever reason someone is not able to travel because of distance, disability, or any other reason that stands in the way of their access. And I should say, this is not like Kelly's project where I can give you lots of data and lots of examples of past use. We're fairly new in this. There's a number of institutions globally who are developing similar services with very different levels of maturity and technological investment, shall we say. So why did we develop the service? As I indicated, we had lockdowns, we had students and researchers who were still desperate to access materials. We certainly ramped up our digitisation services during that time, but we still had people, not just for research, but also in some cases teaching, who really did want live access with an expert on the other side. Having said that, it was a response to the pandemic, or rather the lockdowns that came with the pandemic. It really spoke also to a broader desire that we had institutionally to think more broadly about how we can provide better access, broader access to different communities and audiences for our collections. So this was very much a collaborative project. The institutions who really began pushing this idea were mostly in the UK, and so the International Alliance of Research Libraries and the Research Libraries UK have worked, done a lot of work on documentation, so that any institution who wants to set up this kind of service has a lot of the background information they will need to know how. And I should say, in some cases, this has been as simple as someone using their iPhone. You'll see that we've gone a bit more techie, but it's actually not necessary. In fact, what we discovered in conversations with colleagues across the world developing these services, it was often smaller institutions who didn't have capacity for large scale, or in some cases, any digitization. So they kind of leapfrogged digitization straight into this service that was immediate for their users. So yes, we are dealing with material objects. We are absolutely analog, but at the same time, we feel it's extremely important to keep pushing those frontiers of how do we best help people get that material. I'm so sorry, my mouse is, yes. So how does it work? It's run through our reading room, so it's very much run as a reference service that may require multiple emails or conversations, a classic reference interview. We've had a variety of users. Some are looking for one particular thing. Others may be wondering if it's worth coming to Australia to actually look at material and know how much is there for them. So it might be more of an overview. So we've found that it's extremely important to have those kind of in-depth conversations before the beginning of one of these sessions. To get a little bit techie, we have a Wolf Vision VZCX visualizer. So this is actually, we stole the idea from the University of Pennsylvania, I must admit. It's actually, Edinburgh also uses it as a room visualizer, so you can actually use it as a teaching space or any kind of space to get the whole room showing to your users. We have mounted it on a sit-stand desk, which means it's mobile. We can move it around and take it, for instance, to a classroom or other space. But it's future-proofed because we can always mount it as well into a room. So we run it through Zoom. There's a lot of the technical problems, I should say, we encountered were about resolution and actually making Zoom work for this. Many people tried many different solutions. This is what we ended up with. The Zoom potential is fantastic. So again, it's very, very useful for people who are interested in marginalia or interested in small details. We haven't used it a lot for condition reporting and conservation, but there's certainly a lot of interest from those groups in the potential of this kind of thing. And again, I mentioned there is a link to digitization. For some institutions, it's a way to work around not having digital capacity. For some, it's really useful to say to a user, okay, you're interested in this collection, let me show you what's there. And so what might happen is that we subsequently either have the user saying, that's fabulous, but I've seen what I need to, this is not what I need, or they then know exactly what to ask for. So it's quite a time and resource saver for everyone to be able to understand what is there before they make those requests, particularly with archival materials where the finding aid may not be as detailed as we would like. So obviously there are challenges and constraints. This is a very new service model. It needs to be communicated to staff. There needs to be quite a lot of training and buy-in, but it also needs to be integrated as part of a suite of services offered to users. We tried to very much proactively offer this to people, and we get some take up. There will always be some people who, for their specific research angles, need access to the real material objects. We're not trying to replace this. We see it very much as a complementary service. Resourcing is another concern. It's a very time-intensive process. It's quite bespoke, but that does mean that's a lot of staff time. And again, because we're based on the eastern side of Australia, many of our users are in a quite different time zone. So in order for us to serve their needs, it demands considerable flexibility from reading room staff. We also, in our archival collections, have many collections with sensitive and restricted materials. So that's from politicians' collections. Germaine Greer, the feminist writer, is one of our most restricted collections. She has put a lot of different conditions on viewing. We also hold a lot of First Nations material and care leavers records that we will only share with particular audiences or with particular communities' permission. So we have to be very careful about what we actually use this technology for, because while we can ask people to sign copyright forms, for instance, there's actually no way of restricting the screenshotting on the technology. So we sometimes err on the side of caution in terms of what we will actually offer through this service. Reader experience also relies on technical knowledge and technical infrastructure at their end. We send very detailed notes and we coach people about how this will work, but it does take some people time to get used to it. And the idea that they are kind of directing almost a robot arm, turn the page now, please zoom in on this, and so forth. So it's a very interactive process. And I should say we've had huge amounts of interest, but because of all these different constraints that I'm mentioning, I would say the current take-up is probably not yet commensurate with its potential to deliver a whole suite of interesting different services. So successes and future potential. The service has been incredibly successful. Users love it for the immediate access they get and the attention of a specialist library staff member who is helping them with this. I mentioned marginalia, but provenance, comparing editions, there's looking at, or imprints, there's a lot of very specific uses that on the micro scale have been worthwhile. And on the other, as I mentioned, for people wanting to look at a vast amount of material in order to make decisions about what they actually want to look at in more detail. It has huge potential for access for all kinds of communities. We were originally thinking about interstate and international visitors who could not come physically to Melbourne during lockdowns, but of course there are people for all kinds of reasons, whether health reasons, etc., may not be able to physically visit a reading room, or might not feel that it's a comfortable environment for them. So this allows us to kind of take collections out into the world to those users. It's much more environmentally friendly, obviously, than flying to wherever you want to see this material. So that's another thing that we do have in our minds. And because this technology is so sophisticated in terms of what it can capture and the detail, we have begun exploring how it can be used by our conservation departments in terms of condition reporting and documenting treatments and so forth. Finally, and I think I've probably spoken a bit fast, rushed through things here, but I'd say this is absolutely aspirational at the moment, but like many institutions, the University of Melbourne is going through a truth-telling and reconciliation process at the moment. And as part of that, we are auditing all of the materials that we hold across myriad collections, but particularly the archives relating to or about First Nations peoples. So in consultations with those communities about the future of that material is an extremely important part of the process. Many of those people may be living on country in isolated places. That makes it extremely difficult and again expensive for them to come to us. So what we're hoping is that we can, for instance, network with the public libraries across the country to actually find spaces that we can make safe spaces for communities to look at the material and have those discussions without basically demanding that they come to us. So as I said, this is, from our perspective, quite a new service. There are, if you look at the EGRSO website, there are lots of directions about the different ways one can be set up and the different success stories that some institutions have had in terms of developing a much more mature service, but it's certainly something that we are actively trying to develop further. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was wonderful. So many questions are flowing into the Q&A section. So thanks everybody for putting those in. I'm sort of observing them as we go, and we'll save them up till the end. I have some questions for you both also. So we're going to have a great time in a few minutes. But before we go there, we're going to hear from our last panelist, who is Kieran Wallace from Ireland. Kieran is a self-admitted not archivist, but we love him anyway. I would say, brings a very deep research culture to the project that he's working on in recreating in a virtual way the Irish Treasury archives. So I'm super looking forward to seeing how you've managed that, Kieran, and what the project is looking like. So it's over to you.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that my screen is displaying all right for everybody there.
Looks good.
Thanks very much. First of all, thanks for the invitation. And yes, as you say, I am a non-archivist, so thanks for the love. And also, I think what I'm going to describe is quite different to what the two previous speakers. Fascinating. I was delighted to hear the details on those two projects. So we're a much smaller project. We don't come from an archival profession, although we work closely with archives. And also, it's a much smaller country, Ireland. So from like the vastness of the NARA or the Australian example, Ireland is a smaller example. So the project I'm working with is a combination of historians, computer scientists, and we work very closely with archivists. A key part of our project's ethos, if you like, is like about about democratizing access. This idea of democratizing access, meaning that there's an intellectual access to the materials that we're dealing with. So we're dealing with an archive that was destroyed. We're trying to virtually or digitally recreate it, but the materials that are sort of presented online have to be, from our point of view, have to be intellectually available so people can understand and sort of that with their minds they can access what they're seeing. So that brings issues of translation and transcription and setting the context and so forth. So just see if my screen is working forward here. Yep. There we go. So this is the Public Record Office of Ireland. It was set up in 1867 and it survived until 1922, and I'll tell you about its demise in a moment. When it was set up, it was a purpose-built, fireproof, very modern building. It was situated inside the court complex in Dublin, in the capital of Ireland. So the courts had the sort of a perimeter fence with safety within the fence, with a secure building with its own safety fence around it. And the building itself was designed to be fireproof. So what you see in front of you here on the screen, to the left-hand side is the administration block with things like open coal fires and gas lighting and all those sources of risk. And then to the right-hand side, the building with the tall arched windows is the record treasury. And that's the very language that they use. They called it the treasury from the very beginning. And the idea of the treasury is that it's where all the records are stored. They had beautifully made metal shelves, empty and ready to accumulate all the records, stretching back as far as the Middle Ages. So 7 centuries of records were collected from very unsuitable repositories around Ireland and brought into the record treasury. And crucially, there was a fire break between the two buildings. So if the front building went on fire, the rear building, the treasury, was isolated with all its precious records. So inside the records treasury itself, all the workings were all made of metal as far as possible. They avoided using wood and timber because of the fire risk. There was no false lighting, so all the lighting was just the windows that you see and that huge glass roof. There was no gas lighting, no lanterns, no candle light. And this was in the days before electricity was just coming on stream, if you like. And it was a very successful archive. For about 55 years, its staff received in collections of records which were in very bad condition. They flattened them, they conserved them, they arranged them, they made finding aids for them and so forth, calendars and indexes. And that's been the kind of material that we've been using to sort of help with our work of reconstruction. They also produced every year a sort of an annual report, and within the report in the early decades, they had this grid, and what this grid is doing, it's mapping the upright version of the building. So it's showing you every line of squares that you see on the grid is a floor or a story within the building, and then they're marked as sort of floor 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C, and so on. And what you're seeing here is an example from 1894, and it's showing you what type of materials were held in a particular bay. What we didn't find, and what wasn't generally known in Ireland, is exactly what was in this building that burnt down. So there was sort of a national archive with no overarching catalogue. Lots of individual catalogues and finding aids. So part of our job was to try and find out exactly what had been in it. So through reports like this, and then through accession records, we've been able to determine what was in the building. It was full by 1912, so it was already full within sort of the first 40, 50 years of its life, and they were looking for more space. A successful, busy national archival modern project for Ireland. Then complicated history. We have the Irish War of Independence, the British have withdrawn, and then subsequent to the British leaving, two sides of the Irish revolutionary forces turn on each other and have a battle, the Irish Civil War. And the building you're seeing there is that court complex. Behind the sort of the drum building in the distance is the record treasury itself, and that's completely destroyed, and you can get some sense of the level of destruction there. So you can see through those arched windows how much of the metalwork and old shelving is all twisted like spaghetti, and all the records have been destroyed. That happened in one afternoon. 7 centuries of records went up in one afternoon. So I don't know what disaster management plan could have survived that particular challenge. With the heap of rubble that you see in front of you, the archivists at the time did manage to sort of scramble through the bricks and masonry and pull out a tiny amount of records that had survived the fire. And they called these the salved record collections. So we've had the great thrill of working with National Archives Ireland conservators and seeing them unwrap these records. So the salved records, when they were found in the rubble in 1922, the archivists literally wrapped them in cotton wool and wrapped them in brown paper and put labels on them and stored them away for 100 years. So now the 100 years sort of has passed, and new technology and new time and new money is available to re-examine these. So it's been really fascinating to see what, by total accident, what random records have survived. So that work of early conservation and early reconstruction, we've been building on that since 2016. So a project called initially Beyond 2022, which is the research project of historians, computer scientists and archivists, has produced this thing called the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland, so the VRTI, and that's the product that is out there online now, available for everybody essentially after the destruction. It's a partnership of the University, Trinity College Dublin, where I work, and the state archives in Dublin, London and Belfast, plus the Irish Manuscripts Commission. But importantly, it also has a 60 or 70 growing number of independent archives and libraries around the world, all of whom have copy records, copies of Irish records that were made in Dublin before 1922, that have been distributed around the world with the Irish emigration. When the 22 destruction happens, these copies become much more valuable. So our job has been to initially create a catalogue for a destroyed archive. So the archive didn't have a modern ICA catalogue, it was just a very large, well-organized warehouse. But we've sort of created listings for all its records. And we've applied and modernized it with lots of archival support and guidance from our colleagues in all the archive partners that we have. So we've created a comprehensive catalogue for the destroyed collection that no longer exists. And then our job was to go out in the world and identify copy records, transcripts, any reconstructive records that could help us to repopulate the shelves. And that's what we've been doing since 2016. Initially, we thought we'd find a small amount, but very rapidly it became clear the problem was one of scale. There was so much material out there that we had to sort of put a lot of work into designing a really comprehensive metadata structure that would allow us to have records. Like, imagine an original record that was destroyed might have been, one part of it might have been copied and stored in London. Another part might have been copied by somebody else and stored in Melbourne. And they're copied for different reasons, and each archive might have them archived in a different hierarchical level. We have to unify them together somehow in virtual treasury while respecting their holding institutions' structures. So that was quite a computer science challenge. But to show you some examples of how this has worked, here's an example of a record that was created in 1740. So this record is, the record date is 1740, but it was for somebody writing a history of Ireland, and in front of them they had records going back to 1291. So this is the content, the textual content from 1291, written down in 1740. The original 1291 medieval record was carefully protected and survived and went into the Public Record Office of Ireland, where it was destroyed in 1922. So this document that we see on screen was only a copy until 1922. The day after the explosion, it became the only copy. So its very nature changed in the course of that battle. And so we have sort of creating the metadata to record that archival history, and then to link it into the lost original document is quite a bit of threading that we have to do. So we go hunting for all those sort of records around the world. One particularly sort of rich example we had was in the early 19th century, Irish records, before the record treasury was ever built, Irish records were felt to be in great danger because they were stored in unsuitable houses, places liable to fire and flood and vermin and what have you. So the state at the time paid experts to go and transcribe very ancient records and publish them in printed form. And that would be like a backup version of the originals, should the originals ever get lost. After 20 years, this organization, this Irish Record Commission, was closed down because it wasn't particularly successful, or so they thought. But what we've discovered is that many of their transcripts made in 1810 and 1820 of much earlier records, of records going back to the 14, 15 and 1600s, many of their records have survived in manuscript form, but have not been sort of brought together into one collection. So we've been able to find these transcripts in large volumes in libraries and archives around the world, and coming to over 25 million words of text, which is, although it's a nice 19th century handwriting, it is relating to the 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th century historical content. So for us as historians, that's the exciting bit. There are coincidences in time. One of the bad coincidences was that our research began as the lockdowns for the pandemic began. One of the good coincidences was that the EU-funded READ consortium had produced Transcribus, the automated handwritten text recognition program, as we began. So we became very close friends with them very early on, and we were one of the earliest sort of co-op members of the READ of their co-op when they launched, and we stay in close touch with them. But they have now allowed us to make this idea of access, of making the manuscript documents searchable, so it's accessible to the user in one level of access. And this has been something that we've used tremendously, and the models have increased in facility all the time. Transcribus gives us between 80–85% accuracy, so it's not like a publication quality transcription, but it certainly is enough to find person and place names. So for indexing, Transcribus for us is a very powerful tool. So the Virtual Treasury website, this is just a quick whiz down through our homepage. We have all the normal search things that you would imagine with advanced search and what have you. It's free, it's permanent, it's available to the public worldwide for anybody interested in Irish history. We have the usual things you'd expect around the, what's in the project and so forth. But our research strands, we're a university research project, so we have research related to different parts of Ireland. Gold seams, in some cases, we've been able to recreate almost 100% of a particular series. So wherever the reconstruction is very, very complete, we call it a gold seam. We put lots of other imagery around it, lots of supporting contextual explanatory essays around it so that the actual intellectual access is really there. Curated collections, these are like in any archive, they're to kind of catch the interest of the users, because we find that users don't quite get what an archive is, and their mental access to understanding before they can even begin searching is a problem. So it's to make the story as evident. So we have these hidden stories, just trying to pluck out the people from the archives that, as we all know, the label on the collection might be quite boring, but actually when you go past the label and into it, the records of the people within the collection is what really the public want to get at. We use IIIS and Mirador, but here's an example of a preloaded search for Sligo. Sligo is a town in the west of Ireland. So you get your normal thumbnail images. Take one example here of a document, and you see it shows the National Archives of Ireland's hierarchical tree, and that will be the same for any archives that had donated materials to us. And then it shows you the call number. The metadata appears twice. It appears above on the screen, and it appears here on the image viewer. So you have all the normal metadata you'd expect there. The images are images that, in this case, we've contracted. If they already exist digitally, and if the archive is prepared to share them, we would take their images. And we've had great success with imaging microfilm images, microfilm, and converting into JPEG. So here you see transcribers at work. So this is looking for the word Sligo within the text, and you can see here it's recognizing Sligo in what's that sort of 17th century, 18th century handwritten there. So you can see Sligo written there. And so this is one layer of access into these records. But this Transcribus artificial intelligence program, only just recently we've begun experiments which are really quite interesting, could be a bit of a game changer for us. This is just experimental, so we haven't rolled this out to the public yet. We work with the Registry of Deeds, which has hundreds of thousands, perhaps a million images, over a million images of Irish land deeds from the 18th century up to the present time. And they describe, they're the condensed version of records of land transactions that were lost in the fire in 1922. They are undergoing a huge digitization project. We can use Transcribus to get 85% accuracy on their transcriptions. So you get something like this. So here's a 500 word, I'm not expecting you to read this, but we can then use ChatGPT-4 to proofread the slightly flawed Transcribus output and identify the normal issues of the normal issues of project, normal sort of spelling issues and what have you. But the 500 words here, we can then ask the ChatGPT-4 to produce a computer-generated header for that particular item and a 30-word summary, giving it a 30-word summary for the average reader to be able to just capture quickly. So it's creating the sort of summary metadata. It's only experimental. So far, we've tried it on a number of hundred, and it's been surprisingly accurate. No false positives so far, but it's able to identify what's a person name, what's a place name, what is a land transaction from me to you or from you to me, and to amalgamate place names and so forth in meaningful ways. So it's the potential to catch up in backlogs is really quite great there. The last thing we have there is for this idea of intellectual access is we made, because the building we're describing is a destroyed building, destroyed in 1922, no one alive has ever been in it. We had the building plans and some limited photographs, and we made a virtual model of the building. And this is to lure in perhaps school pupil users or the casual user just mildly interested, maybe to lure them in to connect with the records. So here you have the virtual model and sort of hotspots to tell you stories about the story of the building. You can go in through, this is available free on the website. You can go in through the building. We're entering the search room as it was in 1922, the day before the battle began. And we put sample records out on desks. So the user gets a sense of what's in a search room, what did a reading room look like? And we have sort of particular shiny examples of records there. But also you can go through where no one would have been allowed to go in a real, when it was a real living environment. You can go through into the record treasury itself. And we've seen the treasury in 1867 and it was an empty brand new building. And this is the challenge. We have to fill out as much of these shelves as we can. Again, little stories here. You can jump through the entire building right up through the 6 floors. But what we've done is to sort of give a sense of the physicality of an archive to people online and school pupils who have trouble grasping the physicality of an archive. You go through here to, this is kind of meta, so bear with me on this. We're inside a building that no longer exists in a virtual reality model. We're looking at a doll's house model of that building inside the VR model. So what you see in front of you is a doll's house. And then imagine this now cracking open like a book, like a doll's house. And you'll see, so go back up. You'll see that it opens, that'll just open in 1 second. Yep. No, this has to happen. Yeah, here we go. It'll crack open like a doll's house. Now, what you see is the idea of like a cabinet of curiosities. It's that building split open, 100 sample items on their appropriate shelves, and it's showing you sample records that the user gets a sense of variety. They can go into any of these records. In this particular one, I've used some of those salved records, the ones that were pulled from the rubble that have been conserved and saved. And the record I'll finish on is this one here, which is a burnt record that's damaged. And this I like particularly in all public talks. We go talking to groups in county libraries and schools very regularly. It's showing that the records we're looking at are not necessarily incomplete. We don't know what was missing. There's missing words on this page. We can't tell what was written there, but by studying what remains, we can learn an awful lot about that world. The same is true of all archival collections. They're all missing something. And the same is true of all historical study. You never have the full picture. So you have to admit that there's bits torn and bits burnt, and we work with that limitation. So I leave it there at that, and I'd be interested to hear any questions, and then to hear questions about the other speakers as well, because I found their talks fascinating. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Kieran. I think we have a global project now to just check if we have anything related to Ireland in our collections. And if you do, take a quick photo and send it to Kieran. We can put it in. That was super interesting. I have some questions for you too, but I think what we'll do is right away, we've got everybody, we have about 35 minutes for questions. So I think we're in, we'll be able to get through quite a few of them. I'm not necessarily going to go through in order because I want to have all the panelists have space to answer questions. I think I just wanted to check. I think a few participants have your hand up, so we're not able to bring you in to speak. So if you have a question, do just put the question in the Q&A tab. It's along the bottom of the display in Zoom, and that's how we'll answer questions for today. The first question I think is for Kelly, although I think we heard some interesting things about on this topic from others as well. Given the rise of generative AI, e.g. ChatGPT, what do you think is the continued value proposition for History Hub? Any plans to integrate AI in History Hub? How many archivists help to manage the queries on History Hub? So I guess there's two questions there. Thanks for sharing this initiative.
I love this question. At the National Archives, we're super interested in the GPT technology and how it can help. ChatGPT and GPT-4 are not quite, we're not quite ready to let it just answer questions on its own. It can be so useful for questions that are really routine. We're looking into how it can provide a first draft, but the GPT technology is not great at interpretation or like full human understanding yet. I fully suspect it will be someday, but it's not quite there yet. So we do still need to have archivists answer questions. And the other question was, how many archivists do we have manage the, we have a staff of about, I think it's about 2 community managers, 3 archivists who are dedicated, and then kind of a rotating group. Basically, this is integrated into regular work performance. So there's not like, there's not as much people who are dedicated to just History Hub, but it's something that's incorporated into our work.
Thanks for that. Just while we're on AI, because it came up for you, Kieran, as well, I think that it's smart what you said, Kelly, about in answering reference questions, things can be a little more sensitive and nuanced. So it'll be great to continue experimenting there. Kieran, you were using it to basically create item level descriptions for complex files, and it seems like it's working well. Do you see it rolling out?
Yeah, I mean, we have been sort of scoping out the potential and moving forward slowly with it, increasing blocks and increasing variety of content. And it's a lot of iterative process. You try it out, it gets it nearly right. You try it out again, it gets it right but wrong in a different way, and you keep iterating with it that way. But I'd agree with Kelly that it's not quite ready. I think it's a tool for professionals to use rather than a replacement for professionals. So all the alarmist headlines, I think, what they say, you won't be replaced by AI, you'll be replaced by a professional who uses AI. So it's kind of get to know how to use it, and it's just one more tool. No, it's a very important tool, but yeah, it is just a tool. But it's yeah, I agree. It wouldn't replace a human, and we've all had examples of where it's not answered questions the way you would expect.
But could really help us out with our big backlogs.
Totally,
I think
very much.
The whole hot topic of AI is very interesting to our group, so we'll look to the future for more discussions on this topic. And I should have mentioned the other faces or names that you may be seeing across the top of the screen are the other members of the expert group as well. So they have special status listening in and participating in the webinar this morning as well, afternoon, evening, wherever, whatever time it is for you. So thanks for that, Kieran. I'll throw over a question to you, Lisa, because there's a few about your virtual reading room. The first one was just about, I guess, resourcing and how long it took to develop that VRR platform that you introduced in the pandemic. Are you still evolving it? Was there a point where you got to launch? How long did it take to sort of stand up the service?
That's a great question. And again, I think I don't want the answer to be how long is a piece of string, but this was something that a lot of groups were coming up with spontaneously. And so, for instance, there's a wonderful picture which I saw at a very early meeting in 2021. Someone had taken a plastic milk crate and strapped his iPhone onto it and then put his book underneath it and used it that way. Unfortunately, you could also see his kitchen in the background. So I think the conservators got him and he doesn't show that picture anymore. So you can do it very simply. I would say we took about 3 months from deciding to do it to actually start offering the service. And that was because we had specific needs. There are people who, of course, are interested in the content and people who are interested in the material object. And we wanted to be able to help both groups, which really did mean that high-end visualizer. So I would say that, yeah, it's an investment of time. There's a lot of thinking through of what you're going to do with this service. So I would say a few months is enough if you know exactly what your audience wants. And if you have a pre-existing audience. And for us, as I said, we have a lot of audiences that we believe will benefit from this, but we don't want to make too many assumptions about who they are. It's more about getting the word out and seeing who finds it most useful.
So I'll just follow up with a related question then, because there's another one here, which is more effective and efficient, the virtual reading room or the actual in-person service? And I know for people who can't travel, when you have a big country, obviously there's a gain in a virtual service, but do you have a sense of the effort in both cases?
I would say for the staff, particularly at this stage of development, because yes, we are constantly trying to evolve and iterate this offering, there's a lot more time that goes into a virtual reading room session. We hope for the user that it's actually far, far more efficient. So that's our goal.
Yeah, I love everybody's example is so relevant to a situation where we want to reach people where they are in their homes around the world. So that's almost like you can't put a price on how great that kind of service can be. Thanks for that. Kieran, I'll turn to a question for you. I think your example really resonated for me in terms of the impact social unrest can have on archives, whether targeted or not. I think, unfortunately, it's not something that we can consider is done, and this is an example from the past, even though it is the case for what you've presented. But it really, the question here is thinking about, and maybe you haven't thought this through, but I bet you have. Mm-hmm. Are there differences in terms of how disaster planning sort of happened then in terms of the building and the record to now? It seems like there had been some physical pieces put in place, maybe a lack of metadata that didn't help, but at least in the situation for the Irish Archives, what were the main takeaways in terms of planning?
So I don't work directly for the National Archives here, but I work closely with colleagues there. I know that the shadow of 1922 hangs over everything they do, and again over our colleagues in Belfast as well in the Northern Ireland Archives. So people are very alive to what can happen in just the wrong combination of political and military events that can make things go wrong. Tragically, I know that before the destruction of 1922, a few years before, when the British were still in power, they actually had a committee to meet and discuss how should we protect records against war. And the archivist in charge of the Public Record Office of Ireland said, oh no, it's safer to keep them where they are than to move them, because you'd lose more records in moving to another location than keeping them here. And yet they were kept in one place where they could all be destroyed in one go. So maybe federated storage is one of the solutions. But no, the modern National Archives of Ireland has a proper normal global standard of I don't know the details. I'm not party to it, but I know they regularly, if I have to meet them, they're off at disaster planning days and disaster planning training days. So I think that lesson has been firmly learned. And then for our virtual treasury, we have backups and backups of backups, and we have glacial storage, and the constant thing that our state funders are asking us about, could there be a technological disaster that could mimic the losses of 1922? So we have to guard against that with proper version management and storage, glacial storage and so forth.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's an ongoing. I think what I took from your presentation in terms of disaster planning, which is an impossible solution, but copies of records, transcriptions of records, like any kind of surrogates that we create, then becomes super precious if a disaster occurs. But yes, obviously avoiding the destruction is the best. Yeah, thanks for that. Kelly, one for you. Apologies if it was mentioned in your presentation, but are there plans to make further use of the information provided in the History Hub available through, I guess, the regular catalog to enrich descriptions or other metadata?
Oh, we have been thinking along those lines as well. That's a great question. Not so much enriching the metadata, but if we were able to have the APIs kind of show up simultaneously, like have an API from History Hub enhance the catalog. So if people are on a particular page, you can see like who's talking about this record or what kind of questions there are, or even be able to ask a question directly from the catalog. So yeah, that's a great idea.
Thank you. Staying with the History Hub then for a second, this is a good question. What happens if a question is posted that has personal information? If users are asking about their relatives with social insurance numbers protected, are you doing anything to, well, what happens? I won't feed your answer. What happens if that happens?
I love this question because it also kind of makes me think of the AI component. There are some social security numbers that are PII, and the way we handle that is everything is moderated before it comes to, before it's published live. This protects people from accidentally exposing sensitive information, but it also helps us keep the tone very respectful. We feel like a well-managed community is a helpful community, and we're not, we take care to make sure that the tone is collegiate. But this is an example of where AI really wouldn't work, because there are some social security numbers for people who are long dead that can be helpful information. It's not considered PII anymore. And then, of course, social security numbers for like somebody's dad, who I don't think he'd appreciate that being published publicly. And this is the kind of distinction that a human really has to make.
Thanks for that. Lisa, there's a couple for you that I think we can flip through quickly on the research room. Just in terms of the technicalities, how do you manage the virtual appointments? Do you close the reading room? Do you have a separate space? Is it the same staff doing both?
It's our reading room staff who are offering the sessions, and I should say we originally thought we would do a slot and say this is the slot when we're going to do VRR. We soon discovered with time zones that was not going to, or that was going to so much restrict the number of people who could use it that it was not useful. One of the reasons that we have our visualizer set on a trolley is so that it's mobile. So we can move it to different spaces as we need to.
It's like having a robot assistant. We've
Yes.
got AI, we've got the robots.
Only we're people robots.
Exactly. On the same question for you, are you considering making this a paid service at any point for certain types of research if it's taking more time or going longer in depth, I'm assuming? Is there anything that is leading you in that direction, or is it something that you're still able to manage within current resources?
Look, at the moment, we're able to manage it within current resources with, as I mentioned, a lot of flexibility from reading room staff because we are not in the same time zone as many of our users. So we have to do things like decide to be at a midnight meeting. I don't ask my team to do that. I would just like to be very clear. But there does need to be that level of flexibility. At the moment, we don't charge for any reading room services except for digitisation. So it's not on our radar yet. I think as the service matures, depending on demand, we would probably integrate some kind of tiered model depending on the size and complexity of the question, which is what we do for our digitisation requests.
Yeah, that kind of triage of things.
Yeah.
A couple of questions you brought up time zones. So it sounds like you're being pretty flexible, but do you have a set schedule then that users know that the service is available between certain times, or are you being?
As I said, we gave up on that very early.
Yeah.
It's now more a case of saying, look, looking up at saying, okay, look, do you mind doing 8 a.m. because that's our 5 p.m. So actually just working with the individual. This is at the moment, it's not the large scale thing that others are speaking about in terms of masses of information. It's a very personal one-on-one consultation. So I will say, I mean, I think but below all of these questions is that bigger issue of sustainability. We're very aware that if we're going to make this an integrated part of our offering, we do need to think about how to make it sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think for, well, it's kind of a question for both you and Kelly, where you're sort of, well, and maybe for Kieran as well, where you're establishing this kind of innovative thing. Are there bumps on the way when you then go to integrate it into regular service? Was that smooth? Did you have to do some change management amongst staff? Were there any lessons learned from operationalizing the service? We'll start with you, Lisa.
I think I'm very lucky in that the team who was integrating it were very enthusiastic about it. There was definitely a learning curve on the technology side for some of us. And I would say there was also a learning curve for our IT department, who really had to get their heads around exactly what it was and why we needed particular things. So I think there's mostly excitement around the possibilities, which we all feel we haven't quite fulfilled just yet.
Yeah. Kelly, for you, have you had the same experience? Is it something that that staff took on easily? Is it moving into an operational function? To what extent are staff engaged or on duty with the History Hub?
Yeah, I think that the staff, well, so the bigger, broader picture is that reference archivists and reference librarians, their whole reason, like the reason they get up in the morning is to help people, and they are just naturally more suited to being helpful in ways that are meaningful to their audience. But that said, it's a different way of relating to the public. It's not just, you kind of have to keep in mind, it's not just the one-to-one conversation, it's the conversation with the, hundreds of people, potentially unlimited people who are standing behind that person. So it can be a little bit tricky, but there is some change management, but it is being incorporated into our daily work. And I think the reference staff in general are really well suited to innovative ways to respond to their audiences.
Kelly, what happens if you get questions in different languages other than English? Are there translation functions within the platform, or does this happen?
It does happen. Excuse me. What we do is the archivist will try to find an archivist who may be a native speaker, but that's such a rare occasion. So we really rely on Google Translate, and we'll put the question in the original language, put a translation under it, and then answer in the way that the archivist feels most comfortable.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Kieran, I know that you don't want to speak for the Irish Archives, but is there a connection? How has it?
Our project was born digital, so we didn't have that issue of sort of transitioning over to the digital environment, if you like. So we launched from scratch in June 2022. But certainly we found developing like a user experience that was logical to users was very hard to get right, and we're constantly tweaking with it. So things that seem logical and obvious to us as to how a user will move around the screen, and then 20% of your users do not find it logical, and you think, well, you have to do more surveying to find out. So it's so time consuming and expensive to present a search interface that they expect to find that everybody can interpret. But for us, handling questions, I mean, we work closely with, we go to the National Archives Ireland and give them updates on how to use our service, how to use our platform, and they direct a lot of business our way, a lot of queries our way. And similarly, we go out to libraries and county libraries and so forth and speak to people face to face. There is that interesting thing about the non-online audience. I think this might be what Kelly was mentioning, that notion of who stands behind the person making the inquiry, that there's people that, you know, one query represents a lot of people who have the same question. And so currently I answer the questions that come in an info at, but they're not a huge number of questions, like people just asking general FAQ type questions. But we definitely find that it's very time consuming, but going out on the ground in person, although you're presenting a virtual thing, but the in-person presentation, now that we're able to get out and about again, has proved to be the most fruitful. So the question of resources, how much resources do we want to put into physically visiting? And as I say, Ireland is smaller, so I can get to places relatively easily. So we've got a different challenge there, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's not really answering your question, it's going around your question, but yeah.
But that relationship, yeah.
Yeah.
There was another question specifically for you, Kieran, about the virtual reading room. Absolutely amazing. Is it in Irish too, for maybe people when they're in Ireland? If not, why was that choice made?
That's an interesting question. So if we were a part of the state apparatus, we'd have an onus, a legal requirement to have it in dual language. Because we are a experimental research program, we just present it in English only. Well, the records themselves are almost entirely in English, but the website is entirely in English. However, as we've been producing some publications, so we've done some very neat online publications, if I say so myself, on particular collections, and they've been produced in dual language. So there is there's certainly a market and an appetite for it there. So I would think perhaps in our next iteration, as we get more sort of closer to the state sector, I think there will have to be an additional funding and effort bit to make a dual language version of the website. But that's quite standard in an Irish environment to do that. But currently, because we're a university research project, if you like, we don't quite cross the threshold for compulsory dual language presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a challenge.
Yeah, in lots of countries. Yes, Canada too. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Another related question, not related, but another question for you. How did you take any steps? How did you ensure authenticity and integrity when you were identifying copies of manuscripts to do the reconstruction?
A lot of debate around this, because we began thinking, should we have like a grading system saying this is very reliable, it's a certified legal copy, and this is less reliable because it's produced by some scholar 10 years later, or this is unreliable because it's pencil notes on the back of an envelope. But then we thought, well, we can't really judge, so we will just present it to the user. And so a certified copy, we know this is where somebody goes to an archive and says, I need this for a court case. Can you copy it and stamp it? And it's as good as the original. So we take that as being 100% accurate. But anything else, so that we call a direct replacement. Anything else we call it's a relation. So it's a relation to the lost original. And you, dear user, can have a look. We'll give you some flagging information around it. We'll tell you metadata-wise, we'll tell you what we know about it and about the creator. but it's up to you to make the judgment call, because we can't pretend to know everything that's in our archives. So the subject, people have been talking already about subject experts. People will know, was a particular scholar reliable or unreliable, but we leave that to the user. We eventually kind of stood back from that question about reliability, and we explained that sometimes calendars, calendaring can be done well or badly, and transcriptions can be done accurately or not, but they're all we have. So we leave it to the user to decide with as much context as we can give them to help them decide.
Yeah, it makes sense being as clear as you can about what you know about the piece, and
what you don't know.
It is what it is. Lisa, a couple of questions for you. There's one question that I think you're not going to be able to answer from Abu Dhabi. Are materials in the Foreign Common Office also available in the digital repository? Or maybe this is for Kirana. No, I don't think so. If not, do you offer assistance in terms of some of the required documentation needed to apply for a visa? What are the requirements to physically visit the Kew Library if you're residing outside the UK and wish to physically visit the reading room? So I think that is just there wasn't anybody actually speaking from the UK archives. I don't think anybody here is able to answer this one, if I'm correct.
I'm afraid I can't speak to that.
Okay, so sorry about that one. The other one for you then, Lisa, is as for restricted collections, what legal clause that your organization used to inform readers so that they won't try to ask for the collections through the virtual reading room?
So there's not that I think the short answer is we don't. Certainly on our archives website, any restrictions that a collection has are made very clear in the finding aids. They're very different according to what kind of collection it is. So for instance, I mentioned we hold a lot of care leavers records. We would not make those accessible outside a very detailed framework that a number of the archivists have worked with a whole network of other archivists and professionals to build a framework for ethical access for those for whom they are personal records. So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of legal position that we take. It's either guided by restrictions that the donor has put on collections, as I said, specific ethical framework around care leavers records. And again, there is a building corpus of guidelines on how to treat First Nations materials within our archives, and we will be guided by those. And different communities may come to very different conclusions about whether or not they would like that material made accessible, so that it's always part of a conversation. And again, that gets integrated into our finding aids. And again, there are some things, I mentioned the Germaine Greer collection, the Second Wave Feminist, for those who didn't encounter her. She put a lot of restrictions on her collection, and we will not say no to access, but it needs to be access in the physical reading room at this time under special conditions. So I'm sorry, there's no short answer to that one. It's really very dependent on circumstances.
As often the case in our work. Thanks for that. I've been saving a very simple question for you, Kelly. What is the process if we want to develop our own history hub? Maybe that's a whole session unto its own.
Oh my word. Well, I will say that the process, the technology exists, and that's a fairly simple answer. But as is the case with lots of platforms, it's not a if you build it, they will come kind of answer. You have to have staff that are dedicated to nurturing the community, to making sure that it's a safe place for everyone. The simple answer is the technology exists. You can find it pretty easily. And the more complex question is, how do you build a platform that is useful? And that's really investing in the people behind it.
Yeah, I think that's always the case, right? Just taking the time and going for it, and then contacting Kelly offline to ask her for some advice.
I was going to say, additionally, we are always interested in working with other organizations. So please contact us at historyhub@nara.gov.
There we go. Helping hand is there. There was a follow-up question for you, Lisa, as well on the previous question. And it was just in terms of the framework that you mentioned for ethical access. Is it possible to access this as documentation? Is it open for reuse? Is that available online on your website anywhere?
Yes, it is. I was just copying that. Is there
Perfect.
a way for me to paste that into the chat? I think
yeah, either in the chat, or you may be able to type the answer to the question. Either
so
way.
it's, or I can very briefly share screen, if that's useful. So this is sensitive and restricted, and so there's an access management framework here, a guide to the different types of archival collections we have, and again, student records, which, back to Kelly's earlier comments, can be extremely non-controversial or extremely controversial, depending on time, identity, and so forth. This is separate from the framework that is also being developed for Indigenous collections.
Perfect, thanks for that. I know we have a few minutes left. I'll encourage you to stay till the end because Nampombe has an exciting thing to announce at the very end of the session, but I think we have time to get through just the 2 more questions that are left. Do you have anything to share about whether or how these approaches to digitizing archives may be beneficial accessibility remediation for people living with disabilities? Has that come up in your experience or from your users at all? I think that's a question for most of you, actually. If anybody wants to pipe in.
That's very much a user base we hope to get excited about our services. We haven't reached out to people en masse, but when we have users of the reading room who are, for instance, asking for extra facilitation or help, or we know have access difficulties, we do offer this service to them. And I'm hoping, personally, I feel like it's an area that I would like to see us doing a lot more in. Because for people, it's a game changer for people who have restrictions on physical access.
I think the others are agreeing. Kira, or anything specific to add? Yeah, it's.
I mean, just absolutely. I think the designing of web resources and stuff that have access to people with visual impairment, that sort of thing, that whole sort of stylistic business that comes with web design and user experience is so specialist that we have to rely on our experts to guide us on that. But there are problems then with sort of screen readers and so forth. If you're working with machine-produced transcription that might not be completely accurate and using screen readers, how easy is that for the user to engage with? So there's big challenges in giving into the leveling the playing field for people working with disabilities. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. Well, with that, I think I will turn it over to Namps for the exciting announcement and to thank everybody. Nampombe, over to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Joanna. My name is Nampombe Saurombe, as Joanna has introduced me already, and I am sitting in Pretoria, South Africa, where I work as an associate professor at the University of South Africa. And I am part of the expert group on research and outreach services, where I am with the other colleagues that whom you see their names on the screen. And for me is to just start off by saying thank you so much to our presenters today. Kelly, Lisa, Kiran, thank you for giving us those thought-provoking talks. I saw some comments in the Q&A saying people are going to start their history hubs, and that is what we want. So we just want to say thank you for taking the time and allowing us to, see into your world. You never know. There'll be global repercussions. Things are going to change. To our participants, amazing. At one point, we were about 160 people on this platform. And I would just like to say thank you so much to each and every one of you who took the time to join us this afternoon in this webinar, for the questions, for your inputs and discussions. You do have our contact details on the website. Keep them coming. We would like to keep in touch and see what interests you and what you can do and get involved in our group. I also want to thank Johanna. Johanna, thank you for sharing this webinar session so well. You kept it interesting and under control time-wise, which is not always easy when you talk about things like this, which are so exciting. And I think even a whole day wouldn't be enough. So we want to thank you for sharing this session so well. A special note of appreciation goes to the EGRSO team. I'd like to mention them by name. We have Pamela Wright, Dennis Homer, Maria Castrillo, Andrew Payne. Thank you so much for working tirelessly to make sure that this webinar happened. And indeed, it was a huge success. Last but not least, I want to thank the ICA communications team. We have Maria Paula and Renee. Thank you for all the logistics you had to go through and the communications and all that you need to do to make sure that this webinar happens. We really appreciate your support. I do believe that we have all enjoyed this webinar. I've seen comments in the chat there saying that indeed you've been inspired and you're actually going to go out there and do something. Well, as an expert group, we are constantly on the lookout for programs, for initiatives, activities to get involved in, which are linked with facilitating access to archives and outreach services. And today we looked at an angle of digital access. But this is not the only thing we do, and this is just one of the many initiatives that we are involved in. And I'm sure right now you just want to ask, what's next? How can we get involved? Where are we going? And so I am so happy to inform you that the expert group is going to be launching a survey on access issues and innovations on the 24th of July. And all registered participants for the webinar will receive a link for this survey, and we do hope that you will opt to participate and respond because we really want to know your concerns with regard to access issues and innovations. In 2020, we conducted a similar survey and we came across some very interesting data, but that was 2020. And then the pandemic happened and you could see how many things had to change. You just heard of Lisa's story and there we have it. And we don't know, Lisa, if we went for the pandemic, would you do a virtual reading room so quickly? But anyways, things do change and we just wanted to find out, we have the data from 2020 and we just wanted to find out after the COVID pandemic lockdowns, what has changed? What are your concerns? What is it that you would like to know more of? You've heard that there's a lot of learning that needs to be done. And so we as an expert group would like to find out what your concerns are after the COVID-19 lockdowns and what your institutions are grappling with and see what is it that we can do to, contribute towards making a difference and making sure, as you all know, making sure that people get to use archives because we cannot forget that archives are kept for use. That is really, really important. And that is what drives us every day as an expert group. And so please be on the lookout for that survey. Please complete it. It's a simple survey. It will take you about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. And definitely afterwards, we will share the findings on various platforms, conferences, and launch other initiatives that will also help with regard to access and innovation issues in research and outreach services. And now, for those who will be joining us at the ICA Congress in Abu Dhabi, we also have another exciting workshop that is coming up. And this workshop will be taking place on the 9th of October. And it will be conducted by or facilitated by Andrew Payne. Andrew is on the platform. I don't know if he just wants to show his face so that they know him when they see him there. And his workshop is going to be on the power of archives, enriching knowledge societies through educational program design. A very exciting workshop. If you're there, sign up and don't miss out on this. Well, with that said, mine is to say thank you again to each and every one of you for joining us. I'm saying afternoon because it's afternoon in Pretoria, but wherever you are, thank you so much for making the time to join us. And ours is to wish you every success in all your archival endeavors. And thank you and goodbye. Thank you.